holes, the cosmos, space and time travel, science and technology. Brought to you by theoretical physicist, futurist, popularizer of science, and world-renowned author, Professor Michio Kaku.
And GCNlive.com.
This is Science Fantastic.
Welcome back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. On Science Fantastic, every week we profile some of the most amazing developments in science and technology that touches all of us. Now, in the past, we've had a number of scientists, astronomers, aerospace engineers, and even astronauts on the radio show. But today, we're going to talk about the people, the history, the visionaries. These are the people who actually made history by pushing the space program. So with us today is Fred Natus. He's a science journalist, author of a new book. It's called Star Settlers, The Billionaires, Geniuses, and the Crazed Visionaries Out to Conquer the Universe. So we'll be talking about the history, the passion, the vision of those people who are making history exploring outer space. And if you want to know more about Science Fantastic, go to my website. It's mkaku.org, mkaku.org. And I've written 4 New York Times bestsellers. The latest one is called The Future of Humanity. About one day, perhaps, we'll terraform Mars and go on to explore the universe. And also go to my Facebook site. We have 4 million fans on Facebook. So with us today, once again, is Fred Natus, science journalist, author of the book Star Settlers, The Billionaires, Geniuses, and the Crazed Visionaries Out to Conquer the Universe. He's also an author of another book, The Man from Mars, Ray Palmer's amazing pulp journey, talking about pulp science fiction, which helped to fire up the imagination of the visionaries who are now exploring outer space. So, Fred, glad you could be on Science Fantastic.
Thanks so much for having me.
First question for you is, how did you, as a young kid, get interested in the science program, and what motivated you to write this book, Star Settlers?
Yeah, as a kid, I was more of a comic book fan than a science fiction fan, but it caught up with me by my 20s, and I was looking for a new topic for a book, and as you mentioned, I had just written a book about early history of science fiction and pulp science fiction, and I was pretty fascinated by how Mars had been such a motivator for people, the imaginations, starting in the 1880s to the early 1900s. There was a lot of speculation that there were channels or canals on Mars. This was championed by a lot of leading astronomers at the time, and some pushed it even further, especially Percival Lowell in the U.S., who actually built an observatory in Arizona just to prove the thesis that there was a civilization on Mars, or at least that had built these channels on Mars. And I really think that this helped jumpstart science fiction altogether. It became a popular fad. There were songs written about Mars, the Martian two-step. There were lots of plays and books. One was a little bit like a Christmas story with a Martian coming to Earth and reforming a cranky, greedy old man. There were lots of novels in German, in Russian, and of course H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds was probably one of the most prominent of these. So I felt like there was something there, and also I think I was a little slow to it. I think a lot of people who get interested in astronomy, it's like a switch goes in their head, and they see things differently, and are fascinated by stuff that the rest of us, at least, may not be. And the Mars rover photos of the surface of Mars were just, I think, a revelation for a lot of people. And I began to suspect that something had changed a little bit culturally. I'm a cultural historian. I don't have quantitative proof of this, but just a sense that even the word spacefaring had become popularized as opposed to just talking about space flight or rocketry. This idea that our whole orientation of the civilization might be towards space. And so that was really the origins of where I began the book.
And your book differs from other books about the space program, which dwells about the astronauts and the technology and what's out there. Your book concentrates on the people, the theoreticians, the engineers, the visionaries, the billionaires, and their passion and dreams. So I'd like to start with two of them, one Russian, one German. The first is Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, who was pretty much penniless most of his life, but laid the theoretical groundwork for what it would take using Newton's laws of motion to explore the universe. And then we have the opposite, Werner von Braun, born into the German aristocracy, a member of the Nazi Party, who is the father of modern rocketry. So tell us a little bit about these two individuals. What motivated them, and what inspired them to make such great contributions?
Yeah, I think there was similar inspiration for both of them. Tsiolkovsky said that he was born I think around the mid-19th century. He was one of about 17 or 18 children born to a forester, so they're very provincial Russians. His mother came from a family of, I think, like fix-it people, artisans of that type. And at an early age, he had an accident that left him deaf, and this created a sense of isolation for him as a child. And of course, he had a huge imagination and intellectual capacities. So he was reading his older siblings' science libraries, and he had this almost mystical notion that if you could escape from gravity, in one of his books, he has a character called the gravity hater. He had this idea that it would almost be like a religious or blissful state of floating around, and he draws pictures of this, and this became a touch note for him. He also did read books like Jules Verne, and he went to Moscow as a teenager, penniless pretty much. He had a small allowance his father sent him, and he met up with a fellow by the name of Nikolai Fedorov, who had been an itinerant school teacher, but had become a librarian in the country's only public library at that point in Moscow. And Fedorov had a group of disciples, again, poor scholars, who he served as their university instructor. He brought them books every day. If they were hungry, he'd hand them some money for food, clothes if they're freezing. And Fedorov was another brilliant eccentric, I have to say. He was a devout Russian Orthodox Christian. He lived something of an ascetic, almost saintly lifestyle. He barely ate. He slept very little. He had very few possessions, like a rented room, and supposedly he slept on a metal trunk that was arched on the top, so you could never really get comfortable. I imagine with at least an overcoat over him. But he was certainly not somebody seeking luxury. And Fedorov had even wilder ideas. He was very much excited by the scientific revolution. However, he too was a mystic, a religious mystic, and he had a theory that the common task of humanity was to end death. Death just was annoying, it was getting in the way. It was an insult, and he thought that all of humanity should be banding together to find ways to end death. And of course, he went through medical research, new technologies. He even, and in a sense, this was part of his Christianity. He believed that this would be a great resurrection effort, and he wanted to resurrect all the dead. And of course, I don't know how he would do that, but he believed that technology would find a way. And then once you've resurrected too much.
Now, we have to take a short commercial break, but after the break, we'll continue a discussion with Fred Natus, author of the book Star Settlers, about the people, the visionaries, the people who have the passion to create what is called the space program. And if you want to get on Science Fantastic and ask a question on 100 radio stations, give us a call at 612-564-8135. Give us a call.
Brought to you by Professor Michio Kaku. This is Science Fantastic.
Welcome back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. In this hour, we're talking about the visionaries, the billionaires, the people who have the passion, the foresight, and the knowledge to lay the foundation for the space program. And so with us today is Fred Natus, author of the book Star Settlers, the billionaires, geniuses, and the crazed visionaries out to conquer the universe. Well, we began a short discussion with Tsiolkovsky, this penniless Russian who used Newton's laws of motion to lay out what it would take to go to the moon or Mars. Think about it, actual calculations which we study even today about what it would take to go to outer space. And then let's move on now to a German who actually put this theory into hard steel. He was a member of the German aristocracy. He was Werner von Braun, a member of the Nazi Party. And there's a song about him saying that he only cares where the missiles go up. He doesn't care where the missiles come down, specifically over London. So tell us a little bit now about Werner von Braun. Why did this member of the aristocracy become the father of modern rocketry?
Yeah, so Werner von Braun came of age at a time when there was a big rocketry craze in Europe, particularly, as I was mentioning, in Russia and in Germany. There were amateur rocketry societies developing, and there were industrialists encouraging research into things like rocket cars and rocket trains and rocket planes, and daredevils trying to ride these things. So von Braun was fascinated with rocketry from an early age. He realized that he couldn't understand any of it until he studied math. So he's a reluctant student of math. In any case, as a college student, he fell in with this group of amateur rocketry enthusiasts in like 1929, and they were working on an airfield outside. An abandoned munitions field outside of Berlin. Everybody was working there for free. This was a time when the German economy was in turmoil, so people were living there in bunkers. They were getting food from a soup kitchen, and they had a lot of skilled mechanics and engineers working with them. And within a few years, these amateurs were succeeding in lifting rockets, and the German army becomes interested and suggests that they might want to join the army at a research facility. And most of von Braun's older colleagues were like, no thanks, we're not really eager to take that path. Von Braun, however, as you mentioned, was quite, you have to call him an opportunist, a very charming, affable person who knew how to get along with people and to manipulate them. In any case, he said absolutely. Soon, within a few years, they had some terrific test flights. In the meantime, the Nazis had taken over the country, and so he was working for the Nazis. He was required to become an SS officer, and they were working on their missile program, basically. The British soon bombed the base on the Baltic where they were working on these secret weapons, and Hitler ordered them to build these underground, cavernous workshops in the mountains. And the fact is they had a whole concentration camp of like a death camp of workers building, thousands of these bombs. Pretty remarkable. And they managed to launch a couple thousand of them before the end of World War II, raining them down on London and Antwerp, other places, I think Brussels, killing a couple thousand. But the real tragedy was about 20,000 workers had been worked to death or died of diseases or exposure or starvation. In any case, von Braun keeps landing on his feet. He knows that the Nazis are not going to win the war, and he maneuvers to get to the mountains away from the action in the last days. He even remarked, I just learned that Hitler committed suicide, but the hotel service and wine is wonderful. He soon surrendered to the U.S. Army. They were eager to have him. They wanted to take about 25 technicians for 6 months to U.S. He instead talked them into taking 100 of his colleagues, and most of them spent the rest of their lives in the U.S. and became citizens. And, of course, first thing they were doing was launching V-2 rockets in the desert, White Sands. They then moved to Huntsville, Alabama, working on missile systems. And von Braun, when Sputnik took America by surprise, von Braun's team, within 6 months, had built a rocket capable of carrying the satellite explorer to outer space. So this made him culture hero at a time where everybody was reeling from the idea that the USSR was ahead of America in the space race. And he went on to be appointed a director of the Marshall Center for NASA, helping develop some of the rockets like the Jupiter and the Mercury rockets that lofted the Gemini program and the Mercury program, and indeed the Saturn rockets that were used in the Apollo program. And he then became a strategist for NASA, and a lot of his extravagant demands for excursions to Mars immediately were turned down, and he retired. But he had for a long time there in the 1950s, he was really a culture hero. He appeared on the Walt Disney Hour, some space specials. There was a whole magazine series in Collier's, the 7-part series, in which he introduced ideas about outer space. And he really took on the persona of a patriotic American anti-communist. He said we could build space stations for scientific research. We could also load them up with atomic weapons, and we could destroy any targets on the Earth if we wanted to. So he spoke this real Cold Warrior talk. And I think as the astronauts came into prominence, he sort of fell out of the prominence as the leader of the space movement in the U.S., but he certainly reigned there for a long time.
Okay, well, let's move on because you have so many visionaries, billionaires, and interesting individuals that are profiled in your book. Let's move on now.
Sure.
And, of course, it was von Braun who talked about going to Mars, but then it was a Princeton professor, Gerard O'Neill, who talked not just about going into space, but sending civilization. So tell us a little bit about Professor O'Neill.
Sure. Gerard O'Neill was a professor at Princeton. And he was, I think, he worked on cyclotrons, I believe, and he got sort of tired, apparently, of the academic life and applying for grants and et cetera. And he, as a kind of an adventure, he applied to be a scientist with NASA, a scientist astronaut with NASA. He made it through a few rounds of the program. He was slightly older at the time; he was already 40, and he ended up getting winnowed out. And this is a real crushing blow to him at the time. But he then went on to come up with this idea of building space colonies that would basically be in the same orbit as the Moon around the Earth at the Lagrange point, so about 60 degrees off of the Moon on either side. And he claimed that you could park thousands of space colonies in these areas. And he had pretty grand ideas of building these things using, not bringing materials up, but extracting materials from the Moon and launching them into space, fabricating all the materials you need to create these giant space colonies. Some of them would have square acres as large as Maryland or some different states like that. His favorite plan was giant rotating cylinders that you would, you could look up into the sky and see the colony opposite you. But he had this. It became very popular. In fact, he spoke to Congress about it. Governor Jerry Brown in California was a big enthusiast, and this led to his nickname, Governor Moonbeam, at the time. And there was a whole grassroots interest in it. These L5 societies started to appear on college and high school campuses with the slogan, L5 by 95. So there was this hope in 1975 that within 20 years we'd have these giant space colonies, and that they would help with the energy crisis at the time, and they'd help clean up the environment because they would be beaming, they would harvest solar energy and beam it down by microwaves to rectenna on the Earth. So it was a very, I guess you'd call it utopian, idealistic effort. And again, just in recent years, Jeff Bezos has jumped onto this idea and thinks this is the real answer because planetary surfaces
Okay, let's take another short commercial break, but after the break, we're going to continue a discussion of star settlers, the visionaries, the billionaires, the iconoclasts who are creating the space program of the future. Welcome back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. In this hour, we're talking about not just the space program, but the people, the visionaries, the billionaires who are pushing a new agenda. NASA had a goal. The goal was to, quote, beat the Russians. Well, we did it. And after that, NASA became the agency to nowhere. That is, it sort of lost its way. That is, it doesn't go anywhere anymore. But now we have this influx of visionaries and, yes, billionaires who are pushing a different agenda. Before the break, we were talking about Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon, richest man on the planet Earth. And he has a different vision, not just to beat the Russians, but he wants to make the Earth a celestial garden. That's right, a celestial garden with no pollution. All the hard industry that pollutes could be in outer space. And he envisions millions of people living in outer space. And of course, normally, a crackpot like that would be sent to the loony farm, but this guy happens to be the richest man in the world. So tell us, what sparked Jeff Bezos, a billionaire, to finance his own rocket program called Blue Origin?
I can't speculate into the psychology totally, but certainly he has, in interviews, said that he was a big science fiction buff as a teenager, adolescent. In fact, he gave a speech.
Star Trek in particular, right?
Yeah, you're right, of course. He wanted to call Amazon originally Make It So, I believe. He was a big fan of Captain Picard. But he, even as a teenager, he had envisioned someday building space hotels and space amusement parks. And so he's recently, of course, he's looking to profit from satellite systems and getting involved in moon colonization and so on. But I think there is some utopian or idealism underneath that, where he really he likes that science fiction vision, and he thinks that, O'Neill's way is perhaps just to distinguish himself from Elon Musk, who's gung-ho on colonizing Mars. He likes the idea of not being on a planetary surface. You use much less energy landing or taking off or carrying materials, perhaps even manufacturing materials. And so his idea, again, I think the environmental movement in the 70s led people to think that we had to limit ourselves, limit resources, and this bothered people like Bezos who envision, expansion and grand destinies for humanity. So he seized on Gerard O'Neill's ideas. In fact, he said in at least one of O'Neill's lectures, because he was a student at Princeton also. So his vision is somewhat similar, that most of the population will be living off-planet, and Earth, as you said, will become a kind of a wilderness preserve for perhaps visiting now and then, and leaving it alone to the animals. One of his space colonies painting shows a moose on top of a cliff, so you can imagine a moose in outer space in a natural setting. That's his vision, at least, that he's presenting to the public.
And to put his money where his mouth is, he has the Blue Origin rocket program, including a rocket that takes tourists into outer space, and including the new Armstrong rocket, which will take us to the moon. So tell us a bit about this, the fact that here is a billionaire out of his own pocket is opening up his checkbook and financing a slew of rockets that'll take tourists to outer space and astronauts to the moon. So let's take a short commercial break, and after the break, let's talk about the billionaires who are now helping to fund the space program with a new vision. Once again, this is Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. Give us a call if you want to get on 100 radio stations. The number to call is 612-564-8135. And ask that question that you've always wanted to ask about science.
Brought to you by Professor Michio Kaku. This is Science Fantastic.
Welcome back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. Once again, with us on the line is Fred Natus, science journalist, author of a number of great books, including The Man from Mars, Ray Palmer's amazing pulp journey about the origin of science fiction, and also Star Settlers, his latest book, The Billionaires, Geniuses, and the Crazed Visionaries Out to Conquer the Universe. Where we last left off, let's talk about the billionaires who are now rewriting the agenda for the space program. It used to be that people followed the antics of the astronauts, and young kids dreamed about becoming an astronaut, going on to the Apollo space program. But then, well, it all collapsed. Why? Cost. It costs a lot of money to go into outer space. $10,000 to put a pound of anything into near-Earth orbit. That is your weight in gold. Think of your body made out of solid gold. That's what it costs to put you into outer space. But now, with billionaires building reusable, down the cost of these missions, we're talking about one day mom and dad may go into outer space. So tell us now a little bit about Blue Origin, the fact that the richest man in the world, Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon, is funding a fleet of rockets, one rocket to take passengers, tourists, into outer space, and another one to go all the way to the moon. So tell us about Blue Origin.
Sure. I will also add in Virgin Galactic, Richard Branson's company, as far as the tourism business, and I think both may very well this year begin taking tourists up on suborbital flights to experience microgravity for a few minutes. And, of course, they're not doing this as a public service. You pay $200,000 or $250,000 per ticket, and that is a round trip. But so I think, again, they are businessmen, and they see a possible business plan here. As far as Bezos he's certainly angling, I'm sure, for government contracts or military contracts. And, of course, he and Musk are in competition for setting up new satellite systems for telecommunications. So for him, I think it's an expanding his business empire as far as he can take it. But there's also this idea that if you go into outer space, you experience what some people call the overview effect, which is almost like a religious experience of realizing that the world should be united, and the nation states are something of a fiction in some ways, and so people have a kind of more holistic vision of the Earth and people's destiny and role on the Earth. So these tourist agencies are also selling this idea: you can become an ambassador back to the Earth and help us through all our problems with global warming and ecological issues.
Okay, now let's shift gears and talk about another billionaire, Elon Musk, that you alluded to. Many people compare him to Tony Stark, the alter ego of Iron Man. The science, genius, industrialist, capitalist billionaire, all rolled up into one, Tony Stark. So tell us a little about the origin of where did Elon Musk come from? Comes from South Africa, humble origins, and skyrockets to become one of the leaders of the space program. How did that happen?
Well, it sounds like he has a lot of ambition and brilliance. He said he was a comic book fanatic as a child and adolescent, and started doing video game programming and that sort of thing. But he claims that his whole vision for creating his empire with his different holdings, the car company, Tesla, Solar City, SpaceX, and any other businesses I left out right now, he says that the whole purpose of that is because he's really serious about colonizing Mars. He just is fixated on the idea of creating a backup planet for humanity, a Earth 2.0, and he keeps talking about having a multiplanetary future. So he's concerned that there might be a comet or asteroid strike that could destroy the Earth, or pandemics that wipe people out, and we need to start seeding other planets or surfaces to avoid this future. Of course, again, I think...
Okay, let's take another short commercial break, but after the break, let's continue a discussion of star settlers, the billionaires, geniuses, and the crazed visionaries out to conquer the universe. And you are listening to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. Give us a call if you want to get on the air. 612-564-8135 is the number to call. And maybe you can ask that question and get on 100 radio stations and the internet and talk about science.
This is Science Fantastic.
Welcome back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. In this hour, we're talking to Fred Natus, author of the book Star Settlers, The billionaires, geniuses, and the crazed visionaries out to conquer the universe. You know, it used to be that NASA was called the agency to nowhere. I mean, it didn't really do anything for so many decades, except, of course, send satellites to the great planets of our solar system. But other than that, we didn't really go anywhere. And the reason for that is simple: cost. It costs a lot of money to go into outer space, and bureaucrats are wary about raising taxes to pay for it. Well, things have changed. Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk are now billionaires opening up their checkbooks, not to mention the fact that Elon Musk is pioneering reusable rockets that you can use over and over again, thereby dropping the cost of space travel, some people think, by a factor of 10, meaning that one day mom and dad can go into outer space. But anyway, let's talk about going back into outer space with the Falcon rocket, which successfully launched our astronauts to the space station recently, and then the Mars program, where he's fielding a Mars rocket of his own design. Could you elaborate?
Only that I've seen videos of test flights. They already have prototypes of this. Lately, it's been called the Starship for a while. I think it was called the BFR. In any case, he's built another space port down in Texas, I believe near the Rio Grande or Brownsville, and they seem to be already having some success with test flights. So he's in some ways on pace to conceivably be getting to Mars by the 2030s. He mentions that these rockets, obviously, they could hold a lot of freight, but they also can hold up to 120 passengers, which is pretty remarkable and would fit into his vision of creating these actual colonies on Mars if that comes to fruition.
Now, there's also a split among astronauts about how to do it. Elon Musk and some individuals say, let's just jump to Mars. You know, we don't need the moon. I mean, the moon is a dead end. Not interesting anyway. Let's just jump to Mars. Other people say, let's do it the tried and true method. First, building a lunar orbiter, and then from that lunar orbiter, then create a Mars rocket that can take us to Mars. So, baby steps by baby steps. So, what are your thoughts? You've interviewed a lot of these people. What are your thoughts about whether or not you think we should take baby steps to Mars, that is, through the moon, or simply take that giant leap into the unknown?
Yeah, as you said, there was a lot of debate about this, and when I first started researching, there was little discussion of the moon at all. Everybody seemed to be fixated either on robotic exploration or a Mars direct sort of idea. And NASA really didn't have any specific plans for Mars. It was all kicked down the road to some decades to come. However, I think there's been a lot of push, perhaps comes from the aerospace industry in terms of what's doable. But I think there can be an argument made. I have heard, like Buzz Aldrin wrote, that he thought that it would be better to launch a Mars mission from low Earth orbit, or at least Earth orbit, where rockets could be assembled and go on to Mars. That the moon really wasn't necessary, but other people argue, well, if your goal is colonization or settlement, the moon sure is an easier and safer place to try out systems and develop fail-safes and conceivably, rescue people or bring them what they need. Because with Mars, the window's only open every 2 years and 2 months. And people really are going to be marooned there if something goes wrong. So that seems to be where the split is. I'm not really an expert, so I'm just a hangers-on trying to find what's going to happen. I got to admit that I think Mars is a lot more romantic idea. Buzz Aldrin said when of the moon shortly after stepping onto it that it was magnificent desolation, and he later said, it's no place to set up shop really. So. We'll see.
Okay, and also in your book, Star Settlers, you make comments about even going to the stars. But what are your thoughts about another billionaire going to the stars?
Oh, okay. Well, I think Yuri Milner's plan, as you say, I did interview the scientist who came up with the idea, as far as I know, at the University of California here, where I happen to live at Santa Barbara, and Philip Lubin. And his idea was to use a whole array of lasers that apparently are brought into phase, so that instead of having one giant laser, which no one can build, you have thousands or millions even of small lasers that are somehow focused together, and you can do the same thing. And again, there were studies of this about a decade ago that made it look impossible, but I believe with microwaves. Just way too costly. The amount of electricity required was more than the Earth could produce. However, I think Lubin's plan at least seems feasible to a lot of people. And the idea is to send out, like you say, 1 gram star chip loaded with sensors and radio communications that would be able to shoot off to Alpha Centauri star system and send back information and data. And of course, they wouldn't.
Okay, unfortunately, we have run out of time. However, Fred, thank you so much for being on Science Fantastic.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed speaking.
And once again, our special guest has been Fred Natus, author of the book Star Settlers, the billionaires, geniuses, and the crazed visionaries out to conquer the universe. And you've been listening to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. Give us a call, and also go to my website, mkaku.org, mkaku.org. We have 4 million fans on Facebook, and I've written 4 New York Times bestsellers. Find out more about Science Fantastic by going to my website, mkaku.org.
World-renowned author, Professor Michio Kaku.
And GCNlive.com.
This is Science Fantastic.
Welcome back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. On Science Fantastic, we profile the amazing, jaw-dropping scientific discoveries which are revolutionizing our world and touching our lives. And also, be sure to drop in on my website. It's mkaku.org, mkaku.org. And it lists the 4 New York Times bestsellers that I've written. My latest one is The Future of Humanity, talking about the future of the space race, the future of Mars exploration, what happens when one day we go beyond the solar system to the nearby stars. And in my other New York Times bestseller, The Future of the Mind, I talk about how physics is beginning to probe the secrets of the living brain. Things that were once considered preposterous in science fiction, like telepathy, telekinesis, mind reading, or things that we see in the movies we can actually do in the laboratory, like recording dreams. These are things that were once considered beyond the pale, and now we can do in the laboratory. And so once again, the website is mkaku.org, mkaku.org. And also on Facebook, we have 3 million fans on Facebook and over 600,000 fans on Twitter. And in this hour, we're going to throw the lines open because it's open mic on Science Fantastic. You're not going to get a busy signal if you call 612-564-8135. You'll get a recording. Leave your name, call letters of the radio station you're listening to, if you're listening to radio, and the city you're calling from, and then make that comment, ask that question, and maybe you can get on national radio. So in other words, give us a call, 612-564-8135, and ask that question, make that comment, and perhaps your thoughts will be heard across the country on national radio. And just remember that some people say, well, gee, maybe I'm not smart enough, or maybe my questions are too dumb. Just remember, if you have a question, chances are thousands of other people have exactly that same so-called dumb question. And sometimes the dumb questions are the most profound questions of all. Science starts with that dumb question. That's why we have so many advances in science, precisely because people ask those dumb questions. So once again, give us a call. 612-564-8135 is the number to call. Okay, well, let's just jump right into the first listener phone call.
Hello, my name is Krish from Cupertino, California. My question relates to reactionless propulsion. And when I say reactionless, I do not mean any false impressions like electromagnetic levitation, centrifugal force, or anti-gravity, etc. Today, if I tell anyone about a concept for reactionless propulsion, everyone suggests me to first develop a theory which would be hundreds of times harder than just conducting the experiment and finding it out. On the other hand, whenever we enabled frictionless motion, I mean invention of wheel, the actual theory was followed thousands of years later. Why is this contrast? Has the theoretical advancement become a barrier to non-incremental experimentation? Especially because current theories, which by the way are great for incremental stuff, but we do not know whether they will even turn out to be consistent with the reactionless propulsion or not. Your thoughts, please. Thank you.
Okay, well, first of all, I'll give you a reaction to your question about a reactionless propulsion, and then I'll give you some advice about what to do with your theory. First of all, we have Newton's 3 laws of motion, and reactionless propulsion would violate the third law. Let's go through the 3 laws very simply. The first law of motion, you know if you go ice skating, and that is an object in motion, stays in motion unless acted on by an outside force. So if I have an ice puck, for example, and I throw it on an ice rink, it seems to go on forever. In fact, it will go on forever if it wasn't for friction, which is an outside force. So in outer space, if you are in motion in outer space, in principle, you go forever without stopping. And that's how our space probes can go all the way out to Pluto and beyond. They coast. They coast once they're in outer space. They don't need rocket fuel. They don't need large amounts of gasoline to reach Pluto. No, they simply coast because there's no friction in outer space. The second law of Newton is force is equal to mass times acceleration. That gives us equations by which we can calculate the tensions on a bridge, the tensions in a rocket ship, and the tensions in the Empire State Building. You know, when I was a kid growing up in California, I used to hear about the Empire State Building, and I used to wonder, how can they build the Empire State Building without knowing ahead of time if it's going to fall down? I mean, you can't make a model, right, of the Empire State Building that's realistic. So how do they know it's not going to fall down? Well, the answer is we have Newton's second law of motion, and that allows you to calculate the stresses on every single brick inside the Empire State Building. In fact, now that I teach physics, I actually give students problems like that, calculate the tensions inside a bridge. Next, we have Newton's third law of motion, which deals with reaction. The third law of motion is known to every child who's ever blown up a balloon. When you release the air on the balloon goes shooting out in the opposite direction. So air goes in one way out the nozzle, and the balloon goes the other direction. That is action-reaction. Now, what this listener proposes is a reactionless propulsion. That is, propulsion like a rocket ship without the rocket, that is, without the exhaust. Now, that'd be great. For example, if I have a reactionless propulsion for a gun, I can shoot the gun and not feel the recoil. But if you ever fired a gun, and I fired many guns because I was in the United States military for about 2 years, when I fired machine guns when I was in the military, I realized that there was a back reaction on my shoulder. And therefore, you have to sort of grit your teeth, knowing that when you fire a machine gun, you're going to get that rapid fire reaction on your shoulder, which could actually hurt. Now, same thing with rockets. If you have a reactionless propulsion system, it means you can have the rocket without the fuel. In other words, it would take off pretty much all by itself, because you need the fuel for action, and then the reaction is motion in the forward direction. Well, so far we see no violation of Newton's third law of motion. We have skyscrapers, rockets, bulldozers, buildings. At no point do we see a violation of Newton's third law of motion. That's why some people think that the search for a reactionless propulsion is futile. Now, let's say you have a theory. Then what are you going to do about it? Some people are hesitant to publish that theory because then your rivals will scoop you and steal your invention. Well, what you ought to do is several things. One, get a patent. In fact, you may want to consult with a patent attorney to get that patent. However, many patent officers require a model that works. Well, let me take a short commercial break, and after that break, I'll give you a word of advice if you have a great invention and you want to make sure that no one steals your idea. Once again, give us a call. 612-564-8135 is the number to call if you want to get on Science Fantastic.
Brought to you by Professor Michio Kaku. This is Science Fantastic.
Welcome back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. The lines are open. If you want to ask a question, make a comment, give us a call at 612-564-8135. When you hear the recording, leave your name, call letters of the radio station you're listening to, if you're listening to one, and the city you're calling from, and then ask that question. Make that comment right to the tape, and maybe your thoughts will be heard on national radio. Well, before the break, we had a question about reactionless propulsion. Many people have tried to create that, because then you could basically have motion without the rocket fuel. Think about that. Rockets without rocket fuel. However, Newton's has the last word. For every action, there's a reaction. And we know that because we've tested it on rockets, airplanes, we've tested it on bulldozers, skyscrapers. Every time there's an action, there is a reaction. And that's codified in something called the conservation of momentum. So, sorry about that. If you are an inventor, I would suggest you try to invent something else other than something that violates Newton's third law of motion. However, if you do have a theory, what are the steps that you should pursue? Well, first of all, you may want to take a patent out on it. However, I warn you that if you have a patent for a perpetual motion machine, usually they ask for a demonstration model. So many people over the centuries have claimed to have created a perpetual motion machine. Energy from nothing. In fact, in antiquity, going back thousands of years, enterprising inventors would go to the king and claim that they can get energy for free. Usually it was some kind of spinning wheel of some sort. And of course, because of friction, you basically lose energy and have to add energy from the outside. But anyway, over thousands of years, people have tried to get inventions sponsored by the king, in which case they could become millionaires in the process. However, after centuries of analyzing all these perpetual motion machines, we physicists have come to the conclusion that there's something called the conservation of energy, which in turn is a byproduct of Newton's laws of motion. So in other words, the patent office will ask you for a demonstration model. Don't just think you can create something in the laboratory and become an instant millionaire. However, I do suggest that if you do have an idea, patent it. Talk to a patent attorney. Or if you simply want recognition for your idea and not necessarily to commercialize it, publish it in a magazine. There's several magazines you can submit it to. There's Physical Review, which is the magazine of my organization, the American Physical Society. It is the premier American physics magazine, Physical Review. There's also a European magazine, Nuclear Physics, for example, published by Elsevier Publishers in Europe. They are one of the leading publishers of nuclear information papers in the nuclear field. So if you have an idea and you don't want to patent it, but you want recognition for that theory, then you may want to send it to these magazines, and then you will get a referee. Sometimes more than one referee. In fact, I referee other people's papers all the time. Magazines send me articles to referee for their magazine. In fact, just last week, I got a article that a magazine wanted me to referee an article about astronautics of interstellar space travel. So those are the paths you can take if you have an idea and you don't want someone else to steal that idea. By the way, don't take it personally. Sometimes the referees can be brutal, but they'll be honest with you. The referee will tell you honestly why they think your idea is great or why it's a bunch of nonsense. Okay, let's move on now to the next listener phone call.
So you know how you can lucid dream? Oh, this is Armand again from Queens. I listen on YouTube. So you know how you lucid dream? I was wondering, if there's one day you think there'll be technology to make you able to control your dreams while you're sleeping, so you can actually function in a virtual world while you're sleeping, while you're getting like a good night deep sleep. All right, thank you very much for that, and I love your show, and have a great day. Bye.
Okay, good. Well, just a few years ago, if you were to ask a question to a scientist about lucid dreaming, they would have considered you to be a crackpot. Well, not anymore. Lucid dreaming, that is the idea that you can control the progress of a dream, is actually correct. There are lucid dreamers who've been subjected to an MRI scan. When they fall asleep inside an MRI machine that analyzes blood flow. It turns out that when you dream, the blood to the prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking part of your brain behind your forehead, shuts down. That's why your dreams become fantastic. They violate all the laws of logic, not just the laws of physics. They violate the laws of logic because the front part of your brain is drained of blood when you dream. And then MRI scans show that the center part of your brain, that is the amygdala, lights up like a Christmas tree. And that's the seat of nightmares, the seat of emotions, the amygdala. And that's one reason why many of your dreams are nightmarish. So it turns out that people who are lucid dreamers have an active prefrontal cortex while the amygdala lights up. Both areas of the brain light up. So in other words, it's true. Not only that, but when you dream, you are paralyzed. So how do you talk to someone who's a lucid dreamer? You give them a piece of electrode in their hand, and you ask them to squeeze it. Even though they are paralyzed when they dream, they have the ability to squeeze gently an electrode in their hand. And that's how you can communicate. That's how you can actually talk to someone who's dreaming and communicate with them. And they can communicate with you by squeezing this electrode. This has actually been done now at the Max Planck Institute in Leipzig, Germany. They put a German who claimed to be a lucid dreamer inside the machine, and bingo, the prefrontal cortex was fully lit up even as he was in REM dreaming state. So in other words, lucid dreaming is scientifically possible. Then the next question is, how do you become a lucid dreamer? It turns out that Buddhist texts going back centuries have given people lessons as to how to become a lucid dreamer so that you can control the direction of your dreams. You can Google it. Some of these things are common sense. One is that just before you go to bed, you have a notebook. You see, when you wake up, right after a dream, you forget the dream within a matter of seconds. Within a matter of seconds, the memory of that dream simply disappears forever. So have a notebook. Write down the dream. Get in the habit of writing down the dream as soon as you have it, as soon as you wake up. Second, prime yourself. That is, before going to bed, say to yourself, I'm going to be a lucid dreamer tonight. I'm going to be awake. I'm going to control the direction of my dream. So get in that frame of mind that you are going to control the direction of your dream when you dream that night. Now, of course, we can't guarantee that you're going to become a lucid dreamer. However, the lessons are centuries old as to how to control the direction of your dreams. This is not science fiction anymore. We actually can do it now in the laboratory. Okay, let's move on to the next listener phone call.
Hi, Dr. Kaku. My name is Tim. I'm calling you from Dallas, Texas. My question regards dark matter. Is dark matter just matter that we cannot observe via visible light, or is it just something nebulous and unknown in the universe? I know that it makes up so much of the universe, and we don't know very much about it. So your thoughts on the matter would be very well appreciated. Thank you very much.
Okay, good question. Well, every high school textbook has to be rewritten. All the high school textbooks say that the universe is basically made out of atoms, but that's not true anymore. We know that there's something called dark matter, which outweighs ordinary matter by a factor of maybe up to 10. Now, how do we know that? First of all, the galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy, well, unfortunately, I have to take a short commercial break, but after the break, we're going to talk about dark matter. How do we know it exists? How do we have maps of dark matter? And what is it anyway? And why is it important? Once again, you are listening to Science Fantastic. Give us a call at 612-564-8135 and ask your question. Make that comment about science.
This is Science Fantastic.
Welcome back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. The lines are open because this is Open Mic on Science Fantastic. How many times have you watched the TV or listened to the radio or read the newspaper and something hits you? Something about the space program, something about the mind, something about human evolution, about medicine, and you are stumped and there's no one to talk to. Well, you can talk to me. You can give me a call at 612-564-8135. You know, I was on a book tour years ago, and a guy comes up to me once after my talk, and he says, you have to answer my question. You just have to answer my question. And I said to him, well, that's very nice. I'll answer your question, but why do I have to answer your question? And then he said, because if you don't answer my question, I may have to wait another 10, 20 years before another theoretical physicist comes by and can answer this question. And I was taken aback. And I thought to myself, and I said, he's right. You know, there are very few theoretical physicists in this world. And how many of them are going to be passing through this small town, signing copies of his book, answering detailed questions about string theory, about Einstein's theory of general relativity, about the unified field theory? So anyway, the point here is, if you want to ask a question, give us a call at 612-564-8135. You get a recording. Leave your name, call letter to the radio station, and the city you're calling from, and then ask that question. Make that comment, and perhaps you can get on national radio. Okay, let's move on now to the next listener. Oh, by the way, I forgot. I have to answer the question about dark matter before we move on. Dark matter was first found by astronomers decades ago, but it was dismissed because it was too preposterous. For example, the Milky Way galaxy spins. It looks like a pinwheel, in fact, but it spins 10 times too fast. By rights, it should fly apart. in which case the Earth should have been flung into outer space billions of years ago. But the Milky Way galaxy is quite stable, and we see these galaxies everywhere in the universe that are very stable, but all of them are spinning about 10 times too fast. Either this means that Newton was wrong, and we are very reluctant to give on Newton's laws of gravity. Either Newton was wrong, or there's a new form of matter in a halo surrounding the galaxy, keeping the galaxy intact, preventing it from flying apart. That's dark matter. Now we have maps of dark matter. Dark matter is invisible because when you photograph these galaxies, we don't see a halo around these galaxies at all. We just see a pinwheel. But they're stable, and they spin 10 times too fast, and we now have maps of dark matter. When light goes through glass, it bends light. So how do you know that there's glass inside your glasses? Well, glass is invisible. So how do you know that there's glass inside your glasses? Because light bends when it goes through your glass, and that's why you have eyeglasses. Same thing with dark matter. When light goes through this invisible matter, it bends. Then, using a computer, we can calculate how much dark matter there is by calculating how much bending of light there is. And you can Google it. You can actually see maps of dark matter reconstructed using computers looking at the bending of starlight. Well, let's take a short break, and afterwards we'll talk about what is dark matter anyway, and why should you care? Once again, this is Science Fantastic. Give us a call, 612-564-8135, and ask that question that you've always wanted to ask on national radio.
This is Science Fantastic.
Welcome back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. Before the break, we had a question about something that is requiring us to rewrite all the high school textbooks, and that is the presence of dark matter. What is it, and why should we care? Well, first of all, as we mentioned before, we have maps of dark matter which surrounds the Milky Way galaxy, holding the galaxy together so that it doesn't fly apart. And the next question is, what is dark matter made of? Well, the short answer is we don't know. There's a Nobel Prize waiting for that person who could finally tell us what dark matter is. However, there are many theories. The leading theory is that it's a new particle. We call it the photino, a particle that is the companion to the photon, which is a particle of light. The photino is invisible, is predicted by a theory called string theory, which is what I do for a living, and it is plentiful and invisible, but has mass. These are exactly the characteristics you want dark matter to have. You want it to have gravity, so it holds the galaxy together. You want it to be invisible, because we don't see anything with our telescopes when we look for that halo surrounding the galaxy. And this particle is predicted by string theory. String theory has not been proven, but it simply says that all matter consists of vibrations. Vibrations of a tiny rubber band. When the rubber band vibrates in different frequencies, you get different subatomic particles. Now, why don't scientists all uniformly agree with string theory? It's a controversial theory. Among other things, it states that the universe is not three-dimensional at all. We think that everything is three-dimensional. You can describe everything by its length, width, and height. However, string theory says that there are 11 dimensions, that our universe is a bubble floating in a much larger hyperspace universe. That's controversial. That's why some people don't like string theory at all, because it forces you to confront a many worlds. The idea that our universe is not just one bubble that's expanding, an idea given to us by Einstein, but there could be many bubbles out there, a multiverse of universes. Now, there is another way to explain dark matter, and that is, if there are these other universes, then matter can exist, stars can exist in these other universes. If these two universes are close together, we would feel the effect of gravity from this other universe, but it would be invisible, because light can only move in our bubble. Therefore, if you hover in hyperspace, you are invisible, but you exert gravity. But that's exactly what dark matter is. It's invisible, but exerts gravity. Now, that is a pretty wild theory, a theory that we are very close to a parallel universe where there are parallel galaxies out there, and that's what causes the halo. Well, personally, I believe in the first theory, that is, for the photino, that is, the particle of the photon, is the origin of dark matter. And why should we care? Well, first of all, we are here today because of dark matter. If it wasn't for dark matter, the galaxy would have been split apart, would have been flung apart billions of years ago. And if it does turn out that dark matter is consisted of these higher resonances of the string, it'll prove one of the greatest theories of all time. That string theory is, in fact, the theory of everything. The theory that explains the entire universe. The fabled unified field theory, the theory of everything. But that's another story. Okay, let's move on now to the next listener phone call.
Hello, sir. This is Bear, spelled B-A-I-R, Bear Kloss. I found your question on Twitter, and I'm from Medford, Massachusetts. And my science question is, in this universe, is a black hole the other side of the Big Bang in a different universe? Thanks.
Well, at first your idea sounds ridiculous and preposterous, but actually there are physicists, colleagues of mine, who actually published papers in this idea. And this idea is very simple, and that is, if we have black holes, why can't we have white holes? In fact, Stephen Hawking wrote papers on this, the fact that somewhere in the universe there should be the opposite of a black hole, which is a white hole. A white hole, instead of absorbing matter, actually excretes matter, shoots matter out. And then the question is a white hole on the other side of a black hole? Well, we'll talk about that after the break. Once again, you are listening to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. Give us a call.
This is Science Fantastic.
Welcome back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. Before the break, we had a question about white holes. So let me explain. First of all, the laws of physics can run forward or backwards in time. For example, if I get a motion picture and I reverse the direction of time, then, well, bizarre things happen. Food comes out of your mouth and reforms to give you breakfast right in front of you. Dead people come out of graves and reassemble to become living people. So if you ran the videotape backwards, it would be very strange, but possible. Unlikely, highly unlikely that food will come out of your mouth and reform to create the fried egg that you had this morning, but possible. So if you have a black hole that absorbs matter like a vacuum cleaner, then a white hole should also be possible. Unlikely, but possible. But we've looked for white holes and we have not found any at all. But white holes are actually rather convenient, because if everything falls into a black hole, then maybe it spews out the other end as a white hole in another universe. Now, this idea was actually made possible by Einstein himself. In 1935, he asked himself a simple question. If you fall into a black hole, does all matter basically die at that point? What happens to the matter? Maybe it funnels out into another universe. So think of a black hole as being a funnel. A funnel where everything comes in, nothing comes out. But on the other end of the funnel, there's a reverse funnel that's upside down, and it's attached to the original funnel. So you have two funnels. One funnel, which is the black hole, which absorbs everything, and the other funnel shoots out matter, and that's a white hole. And then several of my colleagues have said, maybe that's the Big Bang. Maybe the Big Bang is really connected to a parent universe. Now, as bizarre as this sounds, this is compatible with an idea called inflation. And inflation, in turn, is the leading theory of the Big Bang. It turns out that, Alan Guth at MIT proposed the idea of inflation several decades ago. It fits the data. He may eventually win the Nobel Prize for this theory called inflation, which says that our universe can peel off baby universes. So think of a soap bubble, and the soap bubble can peel off baby soap bubbles, and you have this continual peeling off of baby universes. In other words, Big Bangs are happening all the time. Every time you have a peeling off of a baby universe, a black hole becomes a white hole. As preposterous as this sounds, it is compatible with all the data. When you look at the data from our Big Bang, it is compatible with the idea that these Big Bangs happen all the time. Now, does that prove it? No. It only shows that our particular universe seems to have originated from a peeling process from a parent universe, but it is not proof. Proof, we may have to go to another satellite called LISA, Laser Interferometry Space Antenna, which is going to be a gravity wave detector in outer space, which may give us baby pictures of the instant of creation. The instant of creation, the exact microsecond when the baby universe emerged out of the womb, and the hope is we'll detect evidence of an umbilical cord that connects our baby universe to a parent universe. Sounds crazy? Yeah, but hey, this is what we do for a living. We physicists look at the data, and no matter where the data takes us, that's where we go. And so far, our data takes us in the direction of inflation, which in turn makes possible a multiverse of universes. Okay, let's move on now to the next listener phone call.
Hi, my name is Fred Kushner. I'm in Colorado. I'm not currently listening to, but I do listen to our Colorado Public Broadcasting station. And my question is, if the maximum speed limit for any object or electromagnetic radiation in space-time is the speed of light, why is it that space-time itself can expand faster than the speed of light? That would be wonderful if we could answer that question for me. I'm confused.
Okay, well, Einstein's statement that nothing can go faster than the speed of light is slightly incorrect. A more precise statement would be nothing material can go faster than the speed of light. You see, nothing can go faster than the speed of light. I repeat, nothingness can go faster than the speed of light. In other words, nothing can stretch faster than the speed of light. Now, the Big Bang was when we had this explosion of a tiny area which stretched to give us the universe of today. And that stretching process was not material. It was just emptiness. Empty space can expand faster than the speed of light. But material objects cannot go faster than the speed of light. So, for example, here's an example from my youth. When I was a kid, I used to take a flashlight, and I would sweep across the night sky with the flashlight. The flashlight went from one end of the universe to the other end of the universe, thousands and thousands of light years in the other direction. And I said to myself, now wait a minute, I just violated Einstein's theory of relativity, because the image that sweeps across the sky is going faster than the speed of light. Well, I'm a physicist now, and now I realize that, yes, the image went faster than the speed of light, but material objects, that is photons, particles of light, each particle of light did not go faster than the speed of light. Here's another example. Let's say I have a bomber that drops a whole bunch of bombs in a string, and I'm on the ground and I watch all these bombs hit the ground. Each bomb is moving very slowly as it slowly falls toward the earth. But when I look at the image point of where the bombs hit the ground and then rapidly go bum, 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 bum in a line, I realize that that can go faster than the velocity of the bomb itself. So in other words, the image can go faster than the speed of light because it's not material, but not the bomb itself. Okay, well, unfortunately, we have run out of time in this segment of Science Fantastic. Once again, you can always give us a call at 612-564-8135 and leave that question, make that comment, and perhaps you can get on national radio. Once again, this is Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku.
This is Science Fantastic.
Welcome back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. On Science Fantastic, we profile the amazing, jaw-dropping scientific discoveries which are revolutionizing our world and touching our lives. And give us a call if you want to get on Science Fantastic. The number to call is 612-564-8135. All we ask is that you leave your name, call letters of the radio station if you're listening to one, and the city you're calling from, and then ask that question. Make that comment, and perhaps you could get on Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. Now, sometimes people email me and say, well, I'm too bashful to have my name heard on national radio, but you can send me an email. Go to the web and go to my website, mkaku.org, mkaku.org, and you can ask that question, and then perhaps I'll read your response on national radio. And go to my website, mkaku.org, mkaku.org is the website. If you go to my Facebook site at Michio Kaku, we have 3 million fans on Facebook, over 600,000 fans on Twitter. So find out what all the excitement is about. And let's say it's 4 o'clock in the morning, and you're all alone, and something just pops into your mind, something about health, something about the future, something about evolution, something about DNA, something about the universe, but there's no one to talk to. Well, you can talk to me. You can give me a call. 612-564-8135 is the number to call, and then you can ask that question, make that comment, and perhaps you can get on national radio. And also, I've written 4 New York Times bestsellers. My latest one is called The Future of Humanity, about the future of the space program. We're talking about going back to the moon. Starting next year, an unmanned probe will be sent back to the moon. Then 3 years after that, we're going back to the moon with astronauts. Then on to Mars and beyond, perhaps to the asteroid belt, and maybe one day to the stars. Find out about what all the excitement is about by getting a copy of my latest book, The Future of Humanity, talking about the future of the space program. Okay, well, let's get right to the listener phone calls. So let's have the first call.
Hi, this is Tom Myers from Rochester, New York. I saw this on a tweet. What will it take to get the U.S. to use the metric system, period? Our students are being forced to learn 2 systems. Their main system, it gives them a handicap when they're using science. This is not a good thing. Thank you.
Yes, I sympathize with you wholeheartedly. When I go traveling around the world, I realize that everybody uses the metric system. Everybody talks in terms of meters and centimeters, except when they come back to the United States. It's back to the old U.S. system. Now, at one point, there was a national campaign years ago to convert to the metric system. However, it never materialized because of, force of habit. It costs money to make the change. And it also is a question of inertia, bureaucratic inertia. You see, politicians don't get points. They don't get reelected by being the champion of the metric system, and people are naturally conservative. Now, in other countries, they have to convert because if you want to engage in commerce, international commerce, then you have to go to the metric system. However, the United States is the 800-pound gorilla. As a consequence, we wanted them to conform to us. Let them convert metric system and our system. Now, it turns out this has practical implications. Years ago, we sent a Mars probe into outer space, and there was a miscalibration because of the conversion from the English system to the metric system, and our space probe was lost as a consequence. So in other words, this has million-dollar consequences. It's not just a question of inconvenience. It's also a question of mistakes are made as a consequence. But politicians have to get behind it, and unfortunately, there's no brownie points that politicians get by pushing something that's unpopular in this country like the metric system. I sympathize with you, but ultimately, it's up to the politicians. Sorry about that. Okay, let's move on to the next listener phone call.
Stephen Winter calling from Clinton, Mississippi. Radio stations 103.9 WYAB. My question is concerning global warming. If I'm not mistaken, when I was in high school in the 70s, they were talking about us coming out of a mini ice age or something like that. They were expecting it to get warmer back then. I just wonder what's happened between then and now. Was that information off track, or we got folks wanting to blame everything on CO2 emissions, which I believe one volcano produces a huge amount. Anyway, that's my question. Just curious about that. Thank you.
Okay, well, you ask a question that's very relevant for today. First of all, there are two kinds of atmospheric disturbances. One is long-term and one is short-term. Now, ice ages come and go on a scale of tens of thousands of years. The last ice age ended 10,000 years ago, and that made possible the rise of civilization. Civilizations could not exist when most of North America was covered with a half a mile of ice. And so we were basically nomads going from one small hunting site to another, chasing after the deer and the buffalo, who also migrated. And it was a very hard life. Then 10,000 years ago, the ice melted, making possible civilization. But these are long-term cycles. In another 10,000 years, we will have another ice age. In other words, 10,000 years from now, don't be surprised if America is under a half a mile of ice. Now, the other question is about global warming. Now we're talking about things that change the weather, not on a scale of tens of thousands of years, forecasting another ice age in 10,000 years, but cycles which happen on a scale of decades to centuries, which are usually not natural. Natural cycles usually take thousands to hundreds of thousands of years, but here we're talking about a change that's taking place on a scale of decades. When you look at the last 100 years, for example, you realize that since the Industrial Revolution, temperatures have risen about a degree, that also sea levels have risen at a very measurable rate, caused by the warming of the oceans. Now, the Earth is warming up. You can talk to any farmer. Any farmer will tell you that his or her livelihood depends on knowing when to plant and what the seasons are. And yes, summertime is about a week longer than before. So global warming, just in the sense of warming, is here. Even President George W. Bush years ago said, quote, something is happening, unquote, with the weather that even the average person knows. Now, here's where the debate comes in. The debate comes in as to how much human activity is responsible for global warming. So in other words, even the so-called skeptics will concede now the fact that the Earth is warming up. We can see this with satellite data, oceanic data, but then the question is, who's responsible? Well, we'll talk about that after the break. Once again, you are listening to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. Give us a call. The hotline number is 612-564-8135. Well, before the break, we had a question about global global warming? Yes, even the skeptics will say that the Earth is warming. And years ago, I was a skeptic myself. I used to say to myself, come on, now give me a break. The Earth is so big, it's huge. And humans, we're so tiny. How can we humans influence something as big as the weather? But then you take a look at what's happening with the Earth itself. All the indicators show that the Earth is warming and it's accelerating. We see that all the major glaciers are receding. All the major glaciers are receding on the planet Earth. Parts of Antarctica are beginning to break off. The stability of Antarctica is now being questioned. We see the fact that summer times are about a week longer than normal. And we see that global swings of the weather are commonplace now. 100-year floods. 100-year forest fires, 100-year this, 100-year that. They seem to be happening all the time. And then the big question is, how much of it is due to human activity? Well, scientists use computer programs. Some people don't like them, but what else are you going to do? Use pencil and paper? When you use computer programs to run the videotape, what you find is that with 90% confidence, it is human activity. Now, 90% confidence is not 100%. Scientists are not saying that with 100% accuracy we say that it's human activity, but with 90% confidence, they say it's human activity that is causing the Earth to heat up. Okay, well, let's move on now to the next listener phone call.
Hi, Dr. Kaku. This is Ben in Chicago. Are atomic events recorded in space-time similar to the way in which digital data is recorded on storage media? And if so, would it be theoretically possible to read historical events of the past and then recreate them in the present? In other words, you'd be time traveling to the past, not to alter the past, but to gather data of past events and then recreate them in the present, so you could perhaps alter past events in the present. Doing this would avoid any time-traveling paradoxes, and it could be a way to resurrect a dead person by recreating their bodies and memories in the present time in a way that wasn't possible in the past. Thanks.
Well, you actually ask a question that I used to ask myself as a youth a long time ago. Let's say there's a crime. The light emitted from the crime has bounced off the walls, but if you could reassemble all the light, then you could, in principle, recreate the scene of the crime. So I thought to myself, wow, I mean, we have all this knowledge about atomic physics. We have all this knowledge about atoms and photons and electrons. Why can't we collect all this data, not digital data, but atomic data, and then run the videotape backwards to reconstruct the crime? Well, great idea, but in practice, it's not practical for several reasons. First of all, when light scatters off a substance, let's say there is a crime and light from the crime hits the walls, light scatters in all these different directions, and to recreate that wavefront would require you to know everything there is about the original wave, everything about the texture of the wall that bounced the light off, and the amount of data would be incredible. And so it's not possible using ordinary techniques to then recreate the wavefront. Sorry about that. However, some people have suggested that even though we can't duplicate the atomic data, the digital data may somehow be reconstructed to create an approximation of reality. This is called digital immortality. One Silicon Valley company is already offering to digitize everything known about you. Your credit card records, your Instagram pictures, everything known about you on the web can be digitized to get you a first approximation to who you are. Now, as time goes by, more and more information will be collected about you to the point that we may be able to reconstruct a reasonable facsimile of who you are. And the Silicon Valley company actually is offering to create a robot. A robot that looks like you, talks like you, has the same mannerisms as you. I've actually seen the robot, and it's not very advanced, so don't get your hopes up. But the question of digital immortality is a possibility. For example, take a look at Winston Churchill. Let's say you digitize everything known about Winston Churchill. So when you go to the library, you talk to him. You talk to a holographic image that reproduces the sound, inflection, historical notes, everything known about Winston Churchill. I mean, I wouldn't mind talking to Einstein. I'd have a great time talking to Einstein, or even a reasonable facsimile of Einstein. And then, maybe decades from now, the Connectome Project will be finished. The Connectome Project will map the entire brain. Every neuron of the brain can be mapped to recreate a facsimile of your thinking brain, including your memories, your personality. We're talking about a digital version of you that is immortal. Now, is it really immortal? Well, to paraphrase former President Bill Clinton, it all depends on how you define you. If you are a biological being, then no, this is nothing but a digital tape recorder. However, if you is the sum total of all the information that is known about you, your mannerisms, your feelings, your memories, everything known about you, if that is you, then in some sense we have digitized your soul. So your soul is now being reduced to information. Now, is this possible? Certainly possible. Is it economical and practical? That I don't know. But as computer prices continue to drop, some people may want the option of not biological immortality, but digital immortality. Okay, let's move on to the next listener phone call.
Barton Salen, listening on WSRQ in Sarasota, Florida. Since general relativity says that a clock on the sun would run slower than a clock on the Earth because of the greater gravitational force on the sun, if a clock could survive on the sun, doesn't that mean that those time differences between the sun's clock and our clock would accumulate, so that when we look at the sun today, we would not be seeing it as it is today, but rather as it was in the time of the dinosaurs? Now, I realize that today we see the sun as it is today because when there is a flare on the sun, if it's in the right position, we get hit a few hours later by particles from that flare. So we know that we're watching the sun as it is today. Thank you.
Yes, well, you ask a very interesting question. It turns out that the speed of gravity is the speed of light. If the sun were to disappear right now, it would take 8 minutes. 8 minutes for that information to hit the Earth. So even gravity has a finite speed. Now, as you pointed out, time beats at different rates throughout the universe. On the moon, time beats faster. So if I have a clock on the moon and a clock on the Earth, and the two clocks can talk to each other, the clock on the moon beats faster than a clock on the planet Earth. And this is actually measurable. So this is not science fiction. This is science fact. Get used to it. In fact, Einstein once said that he put a clock at every point in the entire universe. He put a clock, all of them beating at a different rate, but he was so poor he couldn't afford a clock of his own. But it's true. Time beats at different rates throughout the universe. So you're saying, can you accumulate this difference in time? The answer is yes, but it is infinitesimal. So if I have an astronaut on the moon and an astronaut on the Earth, a twin, and they eventually meet years later, they will only be a fraction of a second delayed between the two twins. It's a very tiny effect. So don't think that it has any practical applications at all. But you're right. Time beats at different rates. Okay, let's take another short commercial break. Once again, you are listening to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku.
This is Science Fantastic.
Welcome back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. The lines are open. That's right. It is open mic on Science Fantastic. Here's your chance to ask that question that you've always wanted to ask but never had the opportunity. You can give us a call at 612-564-8135. Leave your name, call letter to the radio station you're listening to and the city you're calling from, and then ask that question. Make that comment that you've always wanted to do. And remember, no question is too dumb to put on national radio. Sometimes the dumbest questions are the deepest and most profound questions of all. And also, go to my website, mkaku.org is the website to go to, mkaku.org. And find out about my 4 New York Times bestsellers about the future of science, the future of jobs, the future of economy, the future of space travel, all of it contained in my books. Okay, let's move on now to the next listener phone call.
Hey, this is Armand from Queens, New York. I listen to you on YouTube. I was wondering, why do you think Elon Musk thinks that we live in like a simulation, like we're a simulation pretty much. We're, made by computers or whatever. I know you believe in the multiverse theory. Well, why do you think Elon Musk believes that we're like a simulation or like a program? Thank you. I love your show. Have a great one.
Excellent question. Well, as I mentioned in my book, The Future of Humanity, we have Silicon Valley billionaires affecting the direction of the space program. And so these people made their money on the internet. For example, Elon Musk was a PhD candidate in physics, like Wernher von Braun, the famous rocket scientist. Elon Musk also went into the PhD program in physics, but after just 2 weeks at Stanford University, he decided, nope, this is not for me. The money is in Silicon Valley. So people in Silicon Valley think you can digitize everything. But you see, there are limits to what you can digitize. For example, how many atoms are there in your body? I mean, there are 10 to the 23 atoms in a mole. Your body consists of many, many moles. And so the number of atoms in your body could be on the order of 10 to the 26 atoms. That's an enormous number of atoms that you cannot digitize. Take a look at the weather. The smallest object that can simulate the weather is not a supercomputer. Even a supercomputer cannot model the weather and every atom of the weather accurately. The smallest object that can model and reproduce the weather is the weather itself. So we say that these things are not calculable. There are simply so many ways in which atoms can vibrate inside a gas to create the weather that it's simply not practical to build a machine that can duplicate every single atom bouncing around inside the atmosphere. Now, people and reality is much more complicated than the weather. And so that's why even classical physics, Newtonian physics, cannot be modeled using a computer. It cannot be digitized. Now, quantum mechanics makes it worse. Quantum mechanics says that all possible universes are possible, and so you would have to digitize not just one universe, you would have to digitize all possible universes in the world of quantum mechanics. And that's why I say that the movie The Matrix was great, but it's a movie. Get over it. It's a movie. We are not living in a simulation. Okay, let's take a short commercial break. Once again, you are listening to Science Fantastic. Give us a call at 612-564-8135 and ask that question that you've always wanted to ask.
Brought to you by Professor Michio Kaku. This is Science Fantastic.
Welcome back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. The lines are open. You're not going to get a busy signal. Give us a call at 612-564-8135. When you hear the beep, leave your name, call letter to the radio station, and the city you're calling from, and then make that question. Make that comment about science, and perhaps your thoughts will be heard on national radio. Okay, let's move on now to the next listener phone call.
Hello, sir. My name is Dale Phillips. I'm actually not listening to a radio station. I'm looking you up online, and I'm calling from Bahrain, in the Middle East. My question is, I sort of have a two-part question. How close are we to making colonies on other planets, or even the moon, or making colonies elsewhere other than Earth, is what I'm trying to say. Exactly how close we are to doing that. And also, one of my favorite episodes of yours is the episode of Sci-Fi Science where you make the lightsaber. How close are we to making the lightsaber from the time you made that episode to now? So I apologize for the two-part question, but that is my two most favorite interests. So thank you very much. My name is Dale Phillips from Bahrain, and hope to hear from you soon. Thank you.
Wow, what a phone call. Yes, I've been to the Middle East, and yes, I'll try to answer your questions. First of all, the colonization of planets is still going to be decades away. Just last December, President Donald Trump issued the Space Policy Directive number 1. And that Space Policy Directive reversed the policies of Barack Obama. Barack Obama basically ended the U.S. manned space program. He canceled the space shuttle, canceled the replacement for the space shuttle, canceled the moon program, and then also canceled the Mars program. However, Space Directive number 1 says we are going back to the moon, then to Mars, and then beyond, perhaps the asteroid belt. Now, let's be real about this. The timetable, of course, is still speculative. Starting December of 2019, the end of next year, NASA intends to send the SLS booster rocket into outer space, and the capsule will go around the moon, unmanned capsule. Then, around 3 years after that, astronauts will go back to the moon. And then around 2030 to 2035, that's when the first astronauts will go to Mars. And then once we're on Mars, we have to set up a Mars colony. And that'll, of course, take even more time. Perhaps we'll use a lava tube as a makeshift base of operations to protect us against cosmic rays and the harsh atmospheric conditions of Mars. Then we'll create a power plant by putting out solar panels and then begin mining operations. Why that? Because ice is a valuable commodity. Mars has plenty of ice. It's a frozen desert. Ice can be melted and purified to give drinking water, broken apart into oxygen and hydrogen to create rocket fuel for the return mission. So again, first we go to Mars, put our flag on Mars, set up a impromptu base of operations, but then we're talking about long-term operations, basically starting mining to extract water. After that, we're going to set up a agribusiness. In other words, we're going to use genetic engineering to create varieties of algae and crops that can be sustained in the harsh conditions of Mars. The goal is to make it self-sustaining, so it's not going to cost anything at all. For example, it turns out that Mars rock can be melted using microwave radiation. This has actually been done in the laboratory to create duplicate rock of Mars, hit it with ultraviolet radiation, and melt it to create brick. So in other words, it's possible to use the soil of Mars to create brick, which will be used as building materials. It'll be possible to mine the ice to create the first mining operations, and then melting the ice caps using solar satellites to beam the energy down to the poles. Now, we're talking decades. We're not talking anytime soon. But you got to start somewhere. And maybe mining the asteroids could help pay the bill, because the asteroids have plenty of platinum chemicals. Once again, if you want to get on Science Fantastic, give us a call at 612-564-8135 and ask that question. Make that comment that you've always wanted to do on national radio. Welcome back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. On Science Fantastic, we profile some of the most amazing developments in science and technology that touches your lives and changes the destiny of nations. And again, if you want to get on Science Fantastic, give us a call. The hotline number is 612-564-8135. And again, leave your name, call later to the radio station and the city you're calling from, and then ask that question. Make that comment that's always been bothering you about science. And once again, no question is too dumb to put on national radio. Years ago, a 16-year-old boy asked a really dumb question. Can you outrace a light beam? It took him 10 years to answer that question, from the age of 16 to the age of 26. But when he was 26 years old, he finally answered that question. Can you outrace a light beam? Well, that 16-year-old boy was called Albert Einstein, and his theory changed the destiny of humanity. He understood what makes the stars shine, the energy behind atomic and hydrogen bombs, the technology that we see in our living rooms in the form of the internet, transistors. A lot of this technology goes right back to Albert Einstein, who asked himself a simple question: can you outrace a light beam? So you can also be part of the March of Science by giving us a call at 612-564-8135 and ask that question. Make that comment. Well, before the break, we had a two-part question, and that is, what would it take for us to build a colony on other planets? And, well, in the 2030s, that's the earliest we could have humans on the red planet. And then it'll take decades after that before we set up the first mining operations. We set up the first agribusiness, and we make it self-sustaining for colonists. And then to create a paradise on Mars, we would have to send solar satellites to then beam solar energy down to the polar ice caps to melt the polar ice caps so that liquid water flows on the surface of Mars once again. And so hopefully, perhaps late in this century, we will have a self-sustaining Martian colony that's not going to cost anything, so that colonists will have a self-sustaining economy based on mining operations, based on agribusiness, to create a permanent settlement on Mars. And then beyond that, well, get a copy of my book, The Future of Humanity, where I talk about going beyond that to Europa, to Titan, and then perhaps even to the nearby planets surrounding other star systems. Now, the other part to the question that we had earlier was the lightsaber. Well, for the Science Channel, I once hosted a science series where we went through the hardware of science fiction, looking at them from the point of view of a physicist. So we looked at the lightsaber. Now, first of all, the lightsaber has a problem, and that is it extends a finite distance from the hilt. Now, how do you do that? Light, of course, simply keeps on going forever unless it bounces off something. So one way in which you can create the temperatures of a lightsaber is with a plasma torch. Plasma torches are actually commercially available. It's basically a large spark that can create a plasma. Now, a plasma is the fourth state of matter. We have solid, liquid, gases, but the sun is not made of a solid, liquid, or gas. The sun is made out of a plasma. That is a gas of dissociated atoms, atoms that have been broken up, and you can create plasma using electricity. So if I have a plasma torch, Then I could use that to cut right through steel, for example, and simulate a lightsaber. However, it's not a true lightsaber in the sense that it goes a finite distance. A lightsaber, of course, is based on light, which can in fact go an infinite distance. But this is as close as you can get to a lightsaber using today's technology. So the lightsaber would have to have a spine. It would have to have a spine that then emits the plasma from the spine and then creates the lightsaber. Now, it is not exactly what you find in Star Wars, but it's as close as you can get using today's and tomorrow's technology. Okay, let's move on to the next listener phone call.
Yes, Dr. Kaku, this is Justin from Texas. I listen to KMET. I was just wondering, what do you think the current administration of the United States is going to do about the problems we have with the space station, International Space Station? What do you think? They're talking about, I guess, renting it out. What do you think the best idea would be to use with the International Space Station? Thank you very much.
Well, you ask a very embarrassing question because at the present time, we don't know what to do with the International Space Station. First of all, let me explain what the administration is doing. The Trump administration has issued, at the present time, 3 space directives. Space Policy Directive 1 talked about going back to the moon, then to Mars and beyond. The second directive talked about private enterprise and encouraging the deregulation of outer space. The Space Directive number 3 talked about space junk. So the administration has not yet stated what its policy is toward the space station. Now, it depends on who you talk to. If you talk to a pure scientist, they would say that we get actually very little new science from the space station. So they say that we perhaps don't even need a space station. Other people say, what a waste, $100 billion, and we're just going to let it deorbit and burn up like a meteor. At the present time, the only practical application would be to commercialize it. But we'll see. But unfortunately, we have run out of time in Science Fantastic. Once again, you are listening to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. Join us every week when we discuss the cutting edge of science, and go to my website, mkaku.org, mkaku.org, and find out what all the excitement is about. Once again, this is Dr. Michio Kaku for Science Fantastic.